Okay, that should work. We got sound now. You just get some feedback, sound. Yep, good. Okay, so let's backtrack. So, just continuing on from the Facebook video that I did the other day, I'm going to talk a bit more about the structures of the mind, um, and just give us a bit more awareness around how we perceive. And so we've got to start at a position where we realize that the brain is a closed box inside the skull, and then we have these sensory inputs. Our five senses are taking in information constantly, and interpreting those signals, and representing them inside the mind, and basically they're projecting all those images and sounds and feelings and tastes and sensations, and we're getting some sort of representation of our reality. And we've got to understand that the representation of reality is not necessarily reality. And a quick example is, I was walking down the street towards the shopping centre the other day, and I saw a person was turned away, and her silhouette, or her profile, I thought I recognized the person, and I was walking towards that person. I was about to say hello and get into a conversation, and because in my mind I had an image of what that person looked like, and then when I finally got to see her face, it wasn't anything like what I had seen in my mind. And so in those moments, your whole reality can shift. So you've probably been in this situation, like you've walked up to someone and you went to say hello, and then they turn you. You get a bit of a shock because it's not what you thought it was going into that situation. And so that's a really small example of how we actually perceive through our filters, through the structures of the mind, and not so much perceiving reality for what it is. And if we go into neuroscience and things like that, I've spoken to some neuroscientists, some pretty high up people in Australia here who've done some major surgeries on people, and they're very well respected in the medical field. And when I would ask them about things I've seen and experienced and heard about in terms of neurology, the answer was, well, the one thing we know about the brain is that we really don't know much about the brain. So when it comes to structures of the mind, we're talking about, say, belief systems, value systems, perspectives, and perceptions. These are all filters in which we're perceiving what we think is reality. And everything that we're actually perceiving is not only, slightly delayed, just like this webinar is, about 7 seconds delayed. So as I say this now, you're actually hearing it 7 seconds from now. And that doesn't even take into account the time distortion, going across from Australia to the other side of the world. So we can't actually know exactly the timing, but it's perceived as being in real time, which is really interesting. So, just as I say that, you can sort of imagine that there's this time distortion going on. And so the brain, to, not get confused, starts to blend it and, create and mesh it together and make it all work somehow. And so when we're looking at these, when we're going into changing our reality, we have to sort of assume that nothing that we're really perceiving is totally accurate. And so if that's the case and we perceive it as being real, then maybe we can, get in between that process, and we can start to alter it in our favor. So, like you've probably seen in the movie Inception, where he talks about the brain is, creating and observing the dream constantly, and it's happening so seamlessly, so quickly that we don't notice it. And then he draws the line through the circle and says, and this is where we get in between that process, and we can start to alter the dream. So when it comes to these structures of the mind, there's a lot of play in there. And I was recently in Los Angeles, and this is the movie making capital of the world. And when you go there, it doesn't seem as big as it seems on the screen. And a lot of the maps that I had of LA and how it was going to appear to me, they didn't quite match up. And so I found it really interesting that the reality was a lot different from the fantasy that I had in my mind. But not only that, is that how much we've been altered and impacted by the entertainment industry. And so the entertainment industry, and especially really, good artists like Spielberg and, Chris Nolan and Stanley Kubrick and those maestros of media, they have a way of creating this image for you, and with sound and color and lighting, and totally hijacking your senses and the structures of the mind and altering them and creating this perception and sensation inside your body. And so we know that when we're perceiving information, whether it's true or not true, whether it's accurate or not, our body's going to respond to it, and then we're going to take some sort of action or not in accordance to that. And so this is a really interesting topic for me, because when you start to accept that what you think is real may not be real, then you can start to recreate your reality from a place that has a lot more suppleness. So I like to start with small things and then expand them and escalate them right up as far as I can go, and then play with those scales. So I was recently looking at a speaker who was talking about going into the unknown, and the unknown for me is, for lack of a better word, is to go beyond those structures of the mind and to start to push into those elements where the mind hasn't really got any precedent to be able to perceive, and therefore it forces the brain to perceive information in ways it hasn't done before. And sometimes this is pleasant and sometimes it's not. And when I was, the last episode of this was approach to training and spiritual practice, and one of the main keys is to take your time with this and to not rush through things and to really go nice and slow, so you can deal with the after effects and the consequences of making those changes. Because when we go through these levels, sometimes the levels really, low and surface. It's not. You have a little bit of a change, like I was saying. You see the girl from behind, and you think she looks one way, and then she turns around. It's a total stranger. To where you can go right up the scale. And I mentioned Stanley Kubrick before, and you can grow up your whole life in a society where, in the 1960s we put a man on the moon, and it was one of the greatest feats of human engineering and what's the word, cooperation. And in a moment there can be doubt placed on it by saying, oh well, it was actually, possibly, I don't know whether one way or the other, but it was faked. It was all faked. And Stanley Kubrick, the director who did 2001, was instrumental in creating that image for us to perceive and buy into a perception that wasn't even real. Now, what's interesting about that is that even though, whether it was real or not, the whole world bought into that belief, bought into that story, and we began acting on it. And we began, donating, putting lots of money towards it. And, kids would run around pretending to be astronauts and all that sort of stuff. So these structures in the mind, although they're invisible, they have a massive effect on us personally and collectively as a society. So make no mistake, this is powerful stuff. Anyone who's been in a situation where your world got flipped on its head through a perception, even though nothing in the environment has changed, but maybe a perception of what's happening in the environment's changed. And a most common example is, if you're in a relationship and you think it's all, fluffy clouds and everything's wonderful, and the next thing you know, that person's cheating on you, and you have this big shock, and then you think, how did I not see that coming? And how long has this been going on for? And if they've lied about this, then what else have they lied about? And then you have this snowball effect, and your whole structures of your mind begins to unravel. And that can be a traumatic experience. It's kind of the mystical experience in reverse. And then you can have the other way, where you can have a structure of the mind that you've grown up believing is all, being one way your whole life. And that is your perception of reality, and that's how you think reality is. And then all of a sudden you get an experience like a mystical experience where it just blows your mind out to a larger scale, and all of a sudden you're questioning everything in a good way, because now you're seeing that you can go beyond the limits that you currently believed as the edge of your reality. For me, I remember it was 1995, I think, and the movie The Matrix came out. And I always had this sort of niggling feeling that there was more to life than what I was perceiving and what I was being presented with. And I could see that there were gaps and there were cracks in things. And then, seeing The Matrix was like, oh, okay, this is, someone's put it into a movie and they're telling the story now. So this can be, it's a double-edged sword. It's not good or bad. It's just all of a sudden you move from this one or the other to a whole new scale where the rules are different, and you need to, reassess everything basically. And so these structures are layered. Like I was saying before, some are very shallow and some are quite subtle and deep. And if we look at it from a programming level, and we use an example, the metaphor of a computer, then you're perceiving this within a program that's been written, but that program's based on, maybe it's based on a programming language like Python or C++ or something like that. And maybe the programmer who wrote this code and hacked this program together from other programs, or maybe it was written from scratch and it might have been written on, on a terminal on a PC using Windows as an operating system, or maybe, it was written on a Mac using OS X. And that's another scale. And then you can go deeper again and go, well, both of these operating systems are sort of built on Linux, which is close to, the kernel inside the system, which, interacts between the hardware and the software. And you go a level deeper again, and you can go, well, maybe that, that code is, broken down and translated from, computer programming language all the way down to ones and zeros. And then you can go a deeper level again, and you can go, well, those ones and zeros are based on, little electric impulses that come through the cable that connect to your computer. And then you can go on and on and on. So when you make these changes, it's really important to know where you're making the change from, because a change at a 1 and 0 by code level, if you 1 0 switched backwards or forwards, can alter everything. And sometimes it can make everything work really well, and other times you can't even access, you can't even open the program or turn the computer on because it just glitches out. And so this is one thing that I wanted to really stress about, is that when you're getting into this kind of work, it's, don't take your time with it, and don't change anything that haven't thought through yet, because there can be consequences that are unforeseeable and are outside your skill level. And this is why I say having a group of people doing this is good, because if you get out of your depth and something happens, then at least you've got observers there who are operating at a skill level that may be similar to yours. So is this interesting so far? I know you said interesting here, but is this getting through, or have I lost you? Okay, cool. So let's, although this is all interesting and cool to talk about and listen to, I like to sort of get into it and practice a little bit. So let's pick a structure of the mind that perhaps let's pick something that's working really well for you. This is a good place to start, because I don't like to start off going, what's wrong with you, and let's change it and let's fix it because it's a problem. The thing we have to understand is that Like I said, we don't understand everything about the brain, and a lot of it is working automatically on autopilot, and that's a good thing. And we want to know what's working well. And so let's just assume for a moment that for you to have the life that you have right now and to be who you are and to be, going in the direction you're in, to be able to have the experience of reality, that it's all working perfectly and, with extreme precision from a point of a higher mind that, is just vastly intelligent beyond your conscious understanding. So I like to start to delve in and go, well, if I was to align with that mind, and let's talk about that mind in a context of a high level structure, like let's say an artificial intelligence, for example. There's a lot of stuff coming out now with blockchain technology and AI coming and emerging, and they're saying that if it hasn't happened already, that once AI starts to get online and starts to evolve, that it's going to evolve so rapidly that within a very short space of time it's going to be more intelligent than the smartest person on the planet, like vastly more intelligent. We're talking 5, 10, 100 times more intelligent. And so if that's the case, then we need to start thinking like, well, how does that look? What would it be like to think like that? And so there was a really good example on a TV show a while back called Person of Interest, where the machine was able to process so much information and so many possibilities, and observe so many micro behaviors from different people, and interpret those patterns in such an accurate way that it could pretty much predict outcomes, potential outcomes and potential futures. And as it was tracking and becoming aware of all these little what's the word, events, and that would cascade into certain outcomes, that it could predict what was going to be happening to a really high degree of accuracy. So if we can start to align our mind with that, and a simple way to start with that would just be to look at who you are, honestly, who you are, where you've come from in your memory, which is another, I'll come back to memory in a second, and then look at where you're going into your future and the possible potentials from this point in time. And you can start to align with that mind and start to really predict your future quite accurately for the most part. I think that when it gets off track is when we're not either being honest with ourselves and where we're at, or we're not paying attention to the information accurately, or we're filtering it out because of the structures of the mind. And the way we filter that out is for several reasons, but one is, is that the structures of our mind are often based on the information that we have stored in our memory. And like I mentioned in the Facebook video the other day, briefly, is that when we have a memory of the past, so for example now, just think of a good memory. You have a good memory that came up for you, one where you felt, really, really great. Felt loved, felt connected, whatever it is. And so when you get that feeling, You can just pause for a moment. If you want to close your eyes, you can. And you can see what you saw in that moment. You can hear what you heard. You can feel what you felt in your body. And you can bring up a memory. And from that memory, you could probably bring up a second memory and a third memory. And if you're really connected to that and you're warmed up, you could probably get a whole cascade of memories that correlate to having that feeling. And if you can do that, then what you can become aware of is that all of those images, those memories, those sensations, those sounds you heard, those feelings, the smells, you can make them as real as you want. But what I want to bring your attention to is that those memories aren't like a file on your computer where you just click and the whole file's there. What your mind is doing is it's reconstructing those memories from scratch, using materials from your memory, and looking through all the data it's collected and pieces. And in other words, it's like if we look at the screen here, and you see the red on the books behind me. There's a part in the brain that is dedicated just to seeing red, and so your mind is creating the red. It's getting the signals in. The energy is coming in through the senses, and the senses is going, well, based on my memory, that's likely to be red based on the information that we're getting. And so the mind, the part of the mind that perceives red, lights up, and then there you go, you see red, and reconstructing the whole image. And so when we close our eyes and we have the memory, we're actually recreating that whole image. Just like a filmmaker would remake an old film. It's not the same film. It's a remake of that film that looks like the old film. And so we do that every time we have a memory, whether it's a past memory or we're creating a future memory. We're constantly creating it in this moment now, and drawing all these pieces together and basically hacking together that sensation, that memory. Yeah, so they're a reconstruction. You're right. That's more that's a great word. So it's not a record, it's a reconstruction. And so when we bring up the memory, we're recreating the memory from what we think the memory was, which means the memory isn't exactly accurate. And you've probably seen this happen before when you're talking with your friends or your parents. Like, I used to have this guy on my sporting team, and at least he believed he remembered everything, and he was pretty accurate for most part. But he'd be like, you were there, and this guy did that, and he could give me stats of the game and who was there and which way I was facing, and he was the goalie, so he got to see everything. And I'd be like, man, I can't even remember what you're talking about half the time. I had a totally different experience, and half of that was a blur, and recreating it, I'm not even sure if it was true or not. And so if we can take that into account, then when we're creating new structures of the mind, especially when it comes to beliefs, often we need evidence to reinforce the belief and hold it up. Each belief needs, like a belief table, needs legs to stand on. And so that's, most of the time we get that through Um, we get that through reinforcing a belief or getting evidence towards that belief. And if you're creating a new structure in your mind, a belief to perceive in your reality in a certain way that you've never perceived before, then often you have to make up that evidence. You have to falsify the reinforcement in the beginning. And so what happens is that neural net starts to form inside the mind, starts to get stronger and stronger. It's like a seedling growing up through the ground. And you get a little sprout, and then a third sprout, and then it starts to get a bit more solid. And then once it gets to a certain strength and it's reinforced enough and it can sort of sustain itself on its own, then as the energy comes in and out through the senses and through the energy system, then it's going to start to distort your reality in a certain way or create your reality in a certain way. And then it's going to show up outside of you. And so that's how I manifest things, is that, I start off with an idea in my head. I write it down, whether it's on, words or symbols or whatever, draw a picture. I'll look at pictures on the internet of whatever it is I'm trying to create. I do my best to observe it in my reality whenever it pops up. And then slowly but surely it'll start to get legs. And then it becomes automatic. It becomes part of my mental structure, and then I can start to perceive things in a new way. And that's how I create my reality. One of the ways I create my reality. And it's a process. It's not something that is instant. If you've ever built a house, then you know that some things take time, and there's delays and setbacks, and things don't always work out the way you hope they would, and have to go back to the drawing board and redesign and all that sort of stuff. So you can give me some feedback on a structure of the mind that perhaps now, after listening to this, you've become aware of that you weren't aware before. And that'll give me something to work with. Okay, so think about, after listening to what I've said, begin to think about what structures you may have in your mind that are working really well and are moving you towards a particular outcome. So, for example, it might be like you might have an idea that you want a healthy body. Oh, okay, you got it, good. So this might be something that you just perceive as your normal. This is something that you um, are good at. This is something that comes naturally to you. Okay, so you're a good cook. That's interesting, actually. It's a good example. So, the structures can be like the dishes that you make, and and the ingredients could be like the bits of information on smaller levels. And the when you when you're getting all these ingredients in the right order, and you put them through the process, and you get this dish out the other end, and then when it's presented to you, you either eat it or you're feeding other people, and it's going to produce certain sensations in the body. But not only that, it's going to have an effect on the entire evening. So one of the things that I know that people talk to me about is that how good their food is, and they don't really go into detail of how it was cooked, but they go into how good it tasted and what a great night they had, and then what happened after that, and how it made their whole weekend, and then that put them in a good mood, and then when they went to work the next day, they had a breakthrough at work. So there's this cascading effect that goes on, and so that's a really good ability to produce certain outcomes, especially if you know what wine to put with the food. Then then it has an even better effect. Um, so, but to get to that point of being able to be a good cook, it's well, first you had to believe that you could be a good cook, right? So, or you had to accept that you enjoyed cooking. Like somewhere there was a structure in your mind that says, "I like cooking. I'm a good cook," or "I'm into food," or whatever it is. Or maybe you got prompted one day, you had a really great meal, and it sent you off on a particular um, set of emotions, and then that made you interested in taking up the skill of being a good cook. And so, coming all the way back to what I said before is that this mind is like a closed box, and it's receiving information and projecting information out constantly, broadcasting and receiving like a radio. Um, a much more advanced one, obviously. Um, that the structures is what really shapes what we do with that information. So I like to use like an example. I worked in doing maintenance on a factory floor once, years ago when I was much younger, and it was a metal extrusion factory. So they would have these big billets of metal, and they would melt them down till they were like molten, malleable steel, like almost like red hot Play-Doh. And then this ram would push it into this die, and then depending on what shape the die was, it would produce, piping. And there would be round piping and square piping and whatever. And the structures of the mind are like these dies and these mechanisms, and the information is like the metal. So it comes in pretty raw, and our brain, through the structures of the mind, interprets and rearranges it and produces some kind of product. And our reality is the product. And from that product, then we refine it again. We get into this loop where we keep building on it and bringing it down more denser and denser into physical reality, and what we at least perceive as being physical reality. And we can get sort of, locked into this perception of life being solid and real. And I think it's more pliable than that. So if we can come out of it, if we can sort of back out of those structures and come up the levels, then it allows us a lot more freedom. Just like when we talked about the computer metaphor, if we believe that this program that we're using at the moment, this webinar software, is all there is. Or a better example, with Facebook, we can access all sorts of things through Facebook, videos and links and all that. But Facebook is not the internet. It's just an interface. It's just a structure that we can work through. So now that we've got a really good handle on the concept, when we relax and we allow those structures just to be, and we can zoom out a little bit from it, step back from those structures and realize that that's not all there is to our reality. We can go all the way back to this, this void, this nothingness, this emptiness, this pure potential. Then we can get a really good view on these structures, and then we can decide if they're useful for us or not. So if you take just a moment to zoom out, and I like to do this, eyes closed. Let's just zoom out, take a few deep breaths, and just keep breathing until things start to loosen up. I start to relax, really relax. And that allows the information and energy to move in and around the structures. Just show me the edges. And I can start to see pretty easily where I'm stuck, or where I'm limiting myself. And I can often find ways that become obvious. They get revealed to me of how to move and navigate through, and to get to where I would really like to be if I wasn't limited by the structure that I'm using to try and get to where I want to be. Does that make sense? And so when we start zooming out, and still keeping in mind, just resting on what we're trying to achieve, and it doesn't have to be good for anyone else. It's just, it can be like your little hobby or your pet project, or your whole life purpose, destiny, whatever it is. When we start to let go of the structures and zoom out a bit, we can start to see, at least at a seedling level, at least at an initial level, the beginnings, if not the full manifestation of what we're trying to achieve is already present in, at least in potential form, in our reality now. And I don't mean in a, wishful thinking way. I mean, you can actually see from here that what you're trying to draw into your life, that you're probably already on track for. And it's probably a lot closer than you realize. And maybe the structure that you're trying to use to get to it is actually the thing that's in between you and it. And if you can release that structure momentarily, then it can just drop into your reality. Can you see what I mean? Sure. I was going to say, let's have a question if you got one. Yeah, so it's an example. Zooming out, once you identify what the structure is, when you start to zoom out, well, not even zoom out, you can actually shrink the structure down if you want to, playing with the perception. And then, have a look at it like your phone, right? Your whole life isn't in the phone, although for some people it is. But when you put it down for a second, you can see more than what's just being presented inside here. Because you notice you walk through the streets and everyone's on their phone and they're connecting with people here and there. And I mean, we're even doing this. And it's easy to get, as an example, it's easy to get drawn into just what's happening here. So the example, the metaphor is, once you understand that this is just a structure, this is just a program that you're filtering, that vast, infinite source of information through and condensing it down. Just like on your phone, you can access the whole internet from here, but you can't store the whole internet on here. So you have to be selective. And the structures of the mind are going to focus you in on particular things in your reality. Just like on the Facebook feed, for example, everything you've liked and everything you've connected to and all the pages and groups you link to, after a while you'll start to notice that it's a similar theme. And so sometimes it's good to put that down and to get outside of the structure and the theme of what you consider to be normal and familiar with, so you can open up and perceive more of what's actually there. And so Yeah, good question. Do I start to imagine things, or do they come up naturally? So, um, I mean, you can do it two ways, but I would recommend, see, first of all, practice being relaxed, because you're going to need that going further in as you get into larger structures or less structures. You become less reliant on structures, and more energies being allowed through, and you're processing information much faster. The amplitude of energy goes way up, the current of energy goes way up. And so, you go from, you know, 1,000 volts or whatever that powers a lamp to, you know, 10,000 volts that powers a whole building. And so you want to be as relaxed as you can so that energy can move through you. And so when you can be relaxed, then you don't have to really work as hard for those images and those answers to come to you. So, for example, let's do this now. So just sit there, relax, get settled in, like you're going to do some meditation. Just breathe and relax. And just focus on breathing. And just start to feel more calm. And if you can't feel calm, then just be calm about feeling whatever you're feeling. And just begin to notice the sensations. Your heart might be beating, might feel heat as the blood's moving through your body, might feel tension, or nice and relaxed, whatever it is. Just observe it, and just get some distance on it, so you're watching it rather than trying to control it. And the other thing is to just give yourself whatever time you need for the answer to come. One of the structures that gets in the way is that you have to get the answer, because if you don't get the answer, then maybe you'll get punished, or maybe you're not doing it right. And if you're not doing it right, what does that mean? And all that sort of stuff. So just relax and just sort of just wait for it to pop up. And sometimes it's good to get prompted, like now, it should pop up. And if it doesn't, that's cool. Just keep sitting there. And this is one of those things when people start meditating, is that all these structures start coming up, all these thoughts come up, all these memories and emotions come up. And people think, oh, I shouldn't do that. I've got to, manage them so I can be relaxed. But all that's coming up to show you what your structures are. And so you can review them. And in your own time, in your own way, when you're ready, when something becomes really clear to you, have a good look at it. And if you can articulate it, write it down. And so while you're breathing and relaxing, I'm just going to play some music. You have many questions. All right, cool. How can you distinguish between memories from the mind and new information? Well, I mean, it's all new information, but are you reinterpreting it as old information in terms of memories? Because you got to remember, each time a memory comes up, you're observing it from a new point of view. You're observing it from who you are now in this moment, based on what you've learned in the last few moments. So before you sat on down to the training session here, your mind was perceiving in a certain way, and now in the last, what's it been, an hour, we've been talking and throwing new concepts and been loosening up the mind and stretching you here and there and warming up, and now it's slightly altered. The structures are slightly reorganized a little bit. It's like if you go to the gym, you're all warmed up and you moved and you stretched. Excuse me. So now all those memories, all that information is coming up for review. And here's a good opportunity: is that if there's anything in there that you want to alter, even ever so slightly, you can start to change those memories a little bit and reorganize them, replay them in a way that you would have liked them to be replayed. And that'll start to put a scratch in the record, so to speak. And when it starts to play automatically again, it's going to play differently. So that's one aspect to look at. The other side to look at it is that often when we're talking about new information, for me personally, I will get inspired. Like, I know that information is fresh because I couldn't think of it. It wasn't in my memory. And this is, people talk about getting visions or deja vu. I mean, you've probably had the experience of deja vu, or if you've ever had a dream and then the next day, something resembles it or it happens. And so this is, or when you have a synchronicity, right time, right place, or something just unfolds, and that you couldn't have. Abel, how you going, man? Good to see you. 5 a.m. What an effort. Thank you. Where was I? Yeah, so you're getting inspiration and new you have this new synchronicity that life starts to unfold, and it's like that you couldn't have planned that. You couldn't have made that happen. Even in your most cleverness, in your most manipulative and your meanest, and you wouldn't have been able to coerce that into happening. It just it was out of your control. And so, but it's a good point. How do you distinguish between new information and old information? And the analogy that comes to mind for me is that you get up every morning, you go to the mirror and you do your hair, and you probably do it the same way you did it yesterday and the day before and all that, and it looks like the same hair, but it's not the same hair. It's not the same moment. Each moment is fresh. We get into that eternal moment of now, where each moment is a fresh recreation. And so uh, here we go into other timelines and multiverses as well. So the structure of your mind and where your focus and your observation is draws you towards these potential slides in time. And so even though we think we're creating the same thing over and over again, it's not the same thing. We're actually, like the old memory, we're reconstructing life to appear that it's the same, but it's not. It's completely fresh. Does that answer the question? And so this is why it's important to understand what our structures of our minds are, so we know consciously whether we're recreating our past or what we perceive as our past, or whether we're creating something new. Because the truth is we're always creating something new, but we might be recreating it to look like the past. Just like I said about the remake of the old movie. It's not the old movie, it's a remake of that movie, even though it's made to appear like the old one. So I'm just going to open it up to a few more questions, because we've covered a lot. Cool. And so, what do you do with all this? The other structure of the mind that I like to use, which I find is a really good starting point, is that you're already doing this, like you're already a master at this, and the thing that you really need to do, if anything, is to realize that, is to know that that's what you're doing, that you're already creating your reality so well, so precisely, so subtly, that you're playing this little game with yourself where you're tricking yourself that you're not doing it. And so, for me at least, it gets to that point sometimes where I just get so sick of being tricky in terms of tricking myself that I'm not doing it, that sometimes I just let myself off the hook and start to open it up again and start to play with it in a new way, where I can take some of the restrictions off and the limitations off and not make it so hard on myself, so I can start to enjoy things a lot more. How's this going so far, guys? You learning? Or are you remembering? Is it striking some chords? Yeah, yeah. And so that's the other part of this, this experience, is that, I think we're at a point now where we're starting to realize that, we maybe don't need a teacher, we don't need a guru anymore. We just need to sort of practice what we already know, because we already know it. And when we sit down and we relax into it, the answers are there. It's pretty obvious, if we're honest with ourselves, what we're doing right and what we're not doing so well, or what we forget to do right, or whatever it is. And it really comes down to practicing, training and practicing. And this group that's starting to form around us now, slowly but surely, and over time, is going to get bigger and bigger. This is more about training the mind to take in that information in particular ways and then project it out into ways that we choose, rather than just doing it automatically on autopilot, and or worse, doing it because we've allowed conditioning to slip by us, that we either let in, that maybe we didn't check, or we were just too lazy at the time, which is a common thing. Because if you can create your reality anytime you like, then there's no rush, is there? But there does come a time where we really need to get on with it. So yeah, cool. Definitely. So yeah, we'll do a lot more. Relaxation is a real skill. It's not just something, it's hard. It's hard work sometimes to relax that much. And just quickly, we'll wrap up soon, but just quickly, when I did get those big amplitudes going through my brain, there was a real risk of the safety switch going off and, tripping me out and knocking me unconscious, which it's happened, many times. It's not something to be afraid of, really. I mean, it feels scary, but, I'm still here and my brain still works really well, I hope. And, I like to think, at least, I'm still pretty intelligent and get the basic tasks done, as well as, the supernatural stuff. But one thing I will recommend, that, this is also part of the approach to training, is that, you give yourself plenty of time to get up to those levels. Just think about, the gym. First thing you need to do is just turn up. That's the first thing to do. Turn up, get into the habit of turning up. Then once you've got that habit locked in and it's automatic, how do we integrate this? Yeah, so good. So it's just pick the easy stuff to get done first, fundamental stuff. So like turning up, make training in this a priority. And what I mean by that is, like, don't push the so just take in what you can. Don't be in a rush to get it all in at once. Give yourself plenty of time. Like, give yourself the rest of your life to learn all this stuff and get the basics down first. Like, for the example, go to the gym. If you're going to the gym to get a fit, strong, healthy body and, do all this amazing stuff because you want to go rock climbing or, do skydiving or parkour or martial arts or whatever it is, you may not be ready for all that yet, but you will one day. And the first step is just to, turn up. Once you get that turning up going and that becomes automatic, you don't have to think about it anymore. You don't have to force yourself to do it. And then you do your routine, and you just get into a routine that's not going to strain you, and something that you can get some enjoyment out of, and try and find out where your sweet spot is. Too much this way is, you put strain on you and you spend too much time recovering and trying to rebalance yourself, and that's, that takes time. So you want to reduce that time. And then on the other side, You don't want it too easy that it's boring and you lose interest. You want just a little bit of challenge in there, and then just find that edge and just lean on the edge gently. The other example is like if you're learning to do the splits, don't strain yourself so you're tearing muscle and all that sort of stuff. Just do it gently, get into it so there's a bit of a stretch, but you can breathe and relax. And when you come out of the stretch, you don't have jelly legs and all that sort of stuff. And you just start to feel good, and you train your body to feel good with the new habit. That's the key. If your body's feeling good, it's going to crave it more and more. And once you get that craving, that addiction going in the right way, it's useful to you. It's not harmful to you. And always keep a check on it, because some people can get addicted to training as well. So you want to keep a good balance, and then give yourself lots of time to master the skill, because at the end of the day, when you master it, you want it to be normal. You want it to feel just like, oh, it's just what I do. It's just who I am. There's no effort in it anymore. And I think that's the key. I think, if we look at, what was that film? Man on the Wire, about the tightrope walking between the Twin Towers. Most people, and when I say most people, I mean me, I'd probably be shitting myself being up there on that rope, even just, looking over the edge, and let alone walking across the wire. But so he trained and trained and trained. That they call that the artistic crime of the century, the planning that went into it to get that wire up there, first of all. And then the skill level that the guy had to have to be able to, do that activity, took years and years of training. And when you see the movie, or the documentary at least, and you see him up there on the wire and he does this presentation, he's just totally calm. It's almost like he's in that lucid state where, that veil, that barrier between dream and reality became very, very supple. And although, you're looking down at the wire under your feet and you see, a couple of 100-story drop, it almost doesn't seem real. It almost seems like it could just be, inside your mind, like wearing a virtual reality helmet, and that there's actually no real danger there, even though there is. And so when the brain and the body can get to that point where it just feels good, at those higher levels, then I think that's the pathway, at least for me, to get there. And just to drive that point home, and then I think we'll wrap up, is if we use the metaphor of free diving, it's not just about you and your ability, it's about your relationship with your reality and your environment. And so in diving, the deeper you go, the more, atmospheres you encounter, and the different pressures you're going to be under. And so at first, equalizing and clearing and is so important, because you get to the first atmosphere, and if you can't equalize and you try to go further, your eardrums will explode and you'll lose your balance, and it's bad. And then you're going to be trying to heal ear infections and all sorts of awful stuff, and it's really painful. And so what we need to do is we go down to that level, and we don't go any further until we've equalized, and our body and our brain and our energy is all aligned, and we're ready. and our body will tell us when it's ready to go to the next depth, and then you can go that little bit extra, and then you'll hit the next atmosphere. And rather than trying to push like, CrossFit style, let's get this done, let's get enlightenment handled in the next 20 minutes, you explore that atmosphere, because there's a lot to learn in each level, and you don't want to skip anything, because everything that you're going to learn in each layer is necessary to get to progress to the next layer, and you're going to need that understanding going in. And what happens is you begin to stack the levels, and when those higher amplitudes come in, when you feel the balance going off, sometimes you can bring it back in, and other times you can ease off the gas. And so one final way of putting it is, if we're going into if we're testing our vehicle for speed, in terms of high energy, we do a lot of runs. We do a lot of runs at varying speeds, and we make sure that everything's working the way it should. As you know, with these training sessions, we've had a few glitches getting in here, but we're here now, and before going further, we needed to make it all get all the levels right. So because as you increase in speed, if you haven't got if you're not accustomed to these new levels, and that you have to grow into those levels and mature into those levels, then if you lose control, you can end up having some pretty bad trips. Yeah, don't force it. And I know it's hard. I get impatient too. But the trick is to, patience is a skill too. So, why not pick that up along the way? Because, while everyone's losing their head, rushing around like a chicken with its head cut off, if you can be the calmest person in the room, then, people start to turn towards you and look to you for leadership. And that's the other thing about these groups forming is, we're looking to create leaders here, because just between us, been around the world a couple of times now, and I think there's a big space for some new leaders to come through. There's a lot of good ones around, but they're getting older, and they're going to need to pass the torch soon, because it's not fair for them to take it all on their shoulders. And the next phase, the next wave needs to get ready soon, I think. I think there's a lot of people who are going to be going, what the hell's going on now that this energy's starting to amp up, and they're going to need a little bit of guidance. So I think we'll pause there. That's plenty. Lots of things to work on and to play with. And unless you have any last questions, I think we'll hold it there and pick it up next week on the new topic, which is, what is the new topic next week? Let me see. New topic is preparing for the infinite. There we go. Yeah, run straight into the next one. Yeah, and we can do a lot more practice. You're welcome, Pierre. Thanks for sticking with me and getting over those glitches. Really appreciate it. And Abel, if you're still there, hope you enjoyed it. And look forward to seeing you next week. Um, you know the drill. If you think anyone else is going to benefit from this, pass on the link, and stay in touch. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.